Hey, what's up? Today I have 5 lighting setups for you that you can achieve by only using one light, and they all look pretty cinematic. One of them is actually very interesting because you can achieve it with only a practical light like your desk lamp or any other light that you already have at home. For the other lights, we will use the new Zhiyun Molus G200 light, which is very powerful at a maximum output of 320 watts, like very bright, and it's also quite small, so easy to carry around both when you're at home but also if you want to shoot for clients. But I actually want to start this video with a little extra tip for beginners here in case you're just starting out lighting your videos professionally, and that is about contrast ratios, what essentially defines the contrast between a certain area of your frame and another area. And I want to show you that here by using that setup. Now, contrast ratio sounds a bit technical, like you actually have numbers that define the contrast ratios, etc. But as a content creator, you actually don't need all those numbers. You don't need to get too technical about it. It's just important to know about it and how to set it up in your camera and with your light. And that is what I wanted to show you here. Right now, I have my key light set here to 35% of the maximum output. So you see it's all well lit here. It's probably a little bit dark in the background, but it's intentional. I like that. But now let's say I would adjust the output of the light, and then I would make sure that the exposure in my camera is set exactly the same for my skin tone, so that my skin has exactly the same exposure as now. But let's see what happens with the background then. So now I've set my key light to only 8%, a lot lower than 35%. And what you probably notice now is that the background is a lot brighter as it was before. And that is because less light hits my face, so I had to make the camera brighter so that my face still has the exact same exposure as before, and therefore the background got a lot brighter. So now I did exactly the opposite. My key light is now set to 100% brightness in maximum power mode, so I have the same exposure, of course, because I compensated for that in my camera with the variable and D filter. But the background now is very dark, and the reason for that is simply that now more light shines on me, but I still did not do any changes to my background. Like this light here shines at exactly the same brightness. These lights here are also exactly the same, and therefore the rest gets a lot darker because I had to make the image in my camera darker to compensate for more light on my skin. And that is very important to understand when you start lighting up your videos, because depending on the brightness level of your key light and how you adjust your camera for that, you define the contrast ratio to your background. Usually you would like to have your background a little bit darker than yourself so it's not distracting from you and that you pop from the background, but you obviously don't want to have it too dark always. Also a bit subjective, different people like different lighting setups, but be aware of that. When you get your first light, definitely make sure that you can adjust the brightness, then play a little bit around with that, get different exposures, and look on your computer what you like after color grading. But now it's finally time to show you the setups that you can achieve by only using one light. The first setup that I want to show you is a bit of a mix between a silhouette shot and a side or backlit shot. I guess you can see the light source is not perfectly behind me while I'm sitting on the desk there, but it is a bit from the side, so it creates a strong silhouette effect, but it also reveals a little bit of my face and the iPad, etc. And the reason why I like such setups a lot is because it creates a lot of depth. Like the screen that you're watching a video on is always two-dimensional, but you want to give it this three-dimensional effect, and you do that by creating shadows with your lighting. And to achieve that, you have to position a light source behind your subject, or at least somewhere from the side, so that shadows are thrown. In that specific example, it's actually a very strong effect. It's quite harsh actually, the shadows, because I only placed this one light source behind me, so everything is pretty strong. And that could be a cool lighting effect for a dramatic look. For example, if I have a video where I have to finish writing a script or so within 1 hour, and so it's like really intense right now, then that's a cool lighting setup. But there's also a way to make that a little bit softer looking, but I come to that in a second, because first I want to talk a bit more about this specific setup. Now, as you can see, the only light that I use in this setup is a practical light. Practical light means basically all the lights that are not professional that you have already at home. So in that case, my desk lamp. So this is actually the cheapest setup that you can have, and as you can see, it looks quite good. Now, of course, I used a few tricks here. At first, I used a mist filter to give it this nice glow effect, so it looks a little bit better. And you can also see that there's camera movement, so I used the camera slider to capture that. Also makes it look a bit nicer. But the light setup itself is actually quite simple. But yeah, as mentioned before, the look right now is pretty harsh, and that leads me to my next setup, just like realistically 2 lights, but it's like 1 professional light and 1 practical light. So I count only the professional light here as 1 light because you don't have to buy multiple lights then extra. In that second setup, I wanted to soften the transitions between the dark shadows and my skin tones a little bit. So all I did to achieve that was that I simply positioned another light, a professional light, directly in front of me. So this is like complete side lighting what I did there. And as you can see now, when you look at my skin, especially in that close-up shot here, it's not that harsh anymore. Now the gradations, the transitions between those very dark shadows and my skin tones are a lot smoother. So if you found only using the practical light a little bit too harsh, then you can use this setup to make it a bit softer looking and to get rid of this ultra dramatic look. But it's still a really nice looking shot. I actually prefer that. I liked it a little bit more. And our next shot was actually a shot that I already got like 2 years ago or so from an FPV video, or at least a similar one. But back then I didn't have such a strong light available, so I couldn't get it to look as dynamic as I wanted to. But now with the Zhiyun Molus G200 I was able to do that, so I replicated this shot just to see for myself how it looks, and of course to show it to you guys. And that is that window lighting shot. So you see me sitting here on the sofa, and right now you see it without any light, and it looks kind of flat. It's definitely not bad, you could use it, but it is a pretty flat looking image. And the reason why it looks so flat is that it's the shadow side of my house, so the sun never shines through the window. So to fake the sun shining through the window there, I just put the Molus G200 light outside. I set it to 200 watts, actually didn't even use full power at 300 watts. And as you can see, it is a day and night difference. Or like, it looks so much more contrasty, so much more dynamic. There's so much more depth in the shot just by placing that light outside. There was one more thing that I did because I found it a little bit too harsh on my shadow side in the first place, and that is that I also use a reflector. Like reflectors, you can get them for like $15 or $20, maybe even cheaper. So I don't really count that as a light, but that is also something that you can remember from this video. Like whenever your shadow side looks a little bit too harsh, when it's too dark and you want to brighten that a little bit up, you don't necessarily need a second light for that. A reflector is perfectly fine, or sometimes even just a white paper or white bedsheet or something like that. It's like anything that reflects light, and then you already get a nicer looking shot. So I'm very happy with this shot now. It's just a bit unfortunate that I didn't have such a strong light before to get this effect. And that was only my first example regarding windows, because you can also use your light to compensate for bright window light. Like oftentimes it's okay if a window is burned out, because most of the time it's not really important what's going on outside. But sometimes you actually want to show what's going on outside. Maybe you have a nice view from a hotel in Dubai or something like that, or maybe your story actually includes something that happens outside of the window. So in that case, you need a strong light to be able to show what's going on outside, because even high dynamic range cameras are usually not strong enough to show everything. So in that case, what I did here, I wouldn't actually describe this shot as really cinematic. It was more to show you that effect in case you have a nicer background. Like my view from the window is not the very best. But anyway, so in the first example, you can see that I exposed for outside, I exposed for the sky, it looks all good, but I'm completely dark. You probably can't even see my face. And now in the next shot, I've overexposed so that you can see my face, but therefore everything is burned out outside, so it also looks pretty bad. But then I added the Zhiyun Molus G200 light. I used max power mode to set it to 300 watts output, and I put that on my face to compensate for the light coming from outside. And now as you can see, my face is pretty well lit up, and you also see all the detail from outside, the sky, etc. So that's overall a much better look. And as you can see, again, I only used one light for that setup, plus a reflector to make the shadow side a bit brighter again, but nothing else. What you need for this setup though is a very strong light. Like here I noticed that I actually needed this 300 watts. And let's come to our last one light setup before we're talking a little bit more about the Zhiyun G200 light, and that is top-down lighting. As you can see, it's actually also super easy to do. I didn't even use a reflector in that case. I just placed the light above my head and it was basically done. It's that simple of a setup. Now, ideally to have for such a setup would be to have a C-stand, because a C-stand allows you to put the light actually directly above your face. In my case now I didn't have a C-stand, so I just brought the light close and brought the angle of the light down as much as I could, as much as the stand allowed me. So it's not perfect, but I actually like how it turned out, because I have that top-down lighting effect, which actually makes your face look very dramatic and puts a lot of emphasis on it, like you're the bad guy in a James Bond movie or something like that. And what I like about this setup specifically now, that it was not a like perfectly top-down shot, was that it also lit up the wall behind me a little bit, and that in my opinion gives it a bit more depth, because if it would be completely black, that wouldn't really work in my opinion. It's a little bit too dull then. So overall a pretty nice setup that you can also easily achieve by only using one light at home, and for this you actually don't need that strong of a light. Okay, so much about the setups, but now let's talk about the new Zhiyun Molus G200 light, which I used in most of them and which I'm also using right now. It's actually not the light, this is just the box the light comes in, but the box already shows what this light is all about, and that is being flexible. Like, this light is very small. It all fits in this small box here, so if you're oftentimes on client work or so, you need to bring a light with you, and this is actually a great one to carry around. Probably wouldn't take that on my motorbike, but if you have a car, what most people have, but I don't, then that's actually a good option. And what also makes this light quite interesting is, as I mentioned before, that it's quite powerful. This light basically comes with two modes, so you can either use it at 100% at maximum 200 watts output, which is already a lot. In most cases you will probably not need that much, but you can also press both buttons at the same time for like 2 seconds or so, and then it switches to maximum power mode, and that gives you 300 watts, I think even 320 watts of power. So that's even brighter, and that's, for example, what I use to compensate for the window light, because there you really need that strong of a light. Now, the thing is really, when it comes to this powerful output, in most of your setups you don't need it. Like a setup like that here for YouTube A-roll, etc., usually 60 to 100 watt lights are perfectly fine, like most of the time actually 60. But let's say you're not sure if you only want to have your A-roll set up all the time, or maybe you also want to shoot a few B-roll sequences like short films at home, or maybe you also do clients work where you want to bring a light, etc., then it's actually nice to have such a strong light available. Because again, like 2 years ago around, I shot this window shot that I showed you here, and I didn't have a strong light. And that's why I would actually say that if you're in a position right now where you want to invest in a bit better light, you should probably already consider investing in a more powerful light as well, because that allows you in the future to create such setups. Aside from that, what's also nice about this light is that you can adjust the light temperature. In our second setup, for example, I had to adjust the temperature of the light to the practical light, because you remember that was quite warm. And if I hadn't done that, it would have looked off, because it like looks all the time like all the light would come from the practical light, even if it doesn't in the final sequence. But if those colors, the temperature of the light would not match, then it would look off. And on top comes that you can control the G200 light also with the GY Vega app from Zhiyun. It's the same app that you can also use for their other lights. The Molus X100, for example, is a light that I used over the past few months all the time. Also super small, 100 watts output. It's actually so small that it fits into your backpack. Love this light. So if you're looking into buying some new lights right now, you should definitely look into those Zhiyun ones, the G200, but also the X100 is a light that I liked a lot. I use it all the time for my B-roll over the past few months. Of course, this video is sponsored by Zhiyun, but to be honest, whenever I review a product that I don't like, I always end up telling the company that I will not make a video about it, because my my audience always comes first, and my audience is you. So when I tell you that I like a product, then it actually means that. No, that doesn't matter if it's sponsored or not. So yeah, so much about the Zhiyun light. I hope you learned a lot in this video today and that you got some inspiration from those shots. And let me know in the comments below what light you are using right now and how you liked it. It's always good to have everything in one place. And I hope to see you in my next video.